4chan, a website more f***ed than Caligula's favourite watermelon, a most wretched hive of scum and villainy. The Wild West of the internet where everyone is welcome and anything goes. Anything within the 17 global rules, of course. A sanctuary for internet weirdos to indulge their passions for video games, anime, comics and cartoons, My Little Pony, for some reason, conspiracy theories, morbid insecurity, extremely sus waifu kinks, and a whole lot of racism, transphobia, homophobia, ableism, misogyny, and of course, trolling. As a community of introverts and social rejects, they are surprisingly adept when it comes to group activity. They successfully convinced a handful of witless people that they could charge their iPhones by microwaving them. They made Shia LaBeouf look about as silly as that guy who f***ed a horse and then died on the internet. They have a knack for Google bombing to start artificial trends, one of which was the swastika. And they cyberbullied an 11-year-old girl who eventually made multiple suicide attempts. They started a hashtag encouraging young Justin Bieber fans to pay tribute to him by self-harming. They invented a fake beauty trend that found its way into communities for people with eating disorders. And they created a cartoon mascot called Ebola-chan, which they directed towards vulnerable people in West Africa. But this story doesn't begin with 4chan. It begins with the second most wretched hive of scum and villainy, World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft is an MMORPG released in 2004. As far as mainstream games go, it was arguably the most immersive one available. And if you wanted to get through all the content, the thing that you needed more than anything else was time. Consequently, the most prevalent players in the servers tended to be the kinds of people who had really nothing else going for them. As well as being a video game, WoW became an online sanctuary for underachievers, introverts, and misfits, almost all of whom were men. For a handful of alienated young men with more warped and unsavory views of the world, this was the perfect environment for those opinions to fester. It was the go-to game for Anders Breivik, Elliot Rodger, the Sandy Hook shooter, and the Batman shooter in Colorado. Now, don't worry, I'm not here to argue that video games cause mass shootings. Who do you think I am, Donald Trump? What I want to talk about is how the communities for games like Warcraft can have the potential to become incubators for radical ideas. And this isn't just my opinion. It was also the opinion of a certain dark wizard who masterminded Trump's election campaign in 2016, Steve Bannon. In 2007, Steve Bannon joined a company called IGE, which specialized in World of Warcraft gold farming, where low-paid Chinese employees would play for obscenely long hours, obtaining gold which they would sell to more affluent gamers in the West. This was where Bannon was introduced to the most intense fringes of the gaming community, a demographic which he believed was ripe for radicalization. In his own words, these rootless white males had monster power. When IGE collapsed, Bannon continued to interact with the Warcraft community and then eventually the wider world of online gaming. He would go through forums and servers looking specifically to court disaffected young men and to mobilize them towards right-wing politics. This would also become part of his strategy to build up the right-wing news website Breitbart. At the same time, he hired Milo Yiannopoulos, and it's no coincidence that Milo, who seemed to have nothing but derision for gamers, ended up being one of the figureheads of Gamergate when he was in Bannon's employ. Of course, Steve Bannon would never say this himself, but it's also very likely that a lot of the people he targeted when he was on these forums would have been children. After all, the only kind of person who is more susceptible to online radicalization than an angry gamer is an angry gamer who is 14 years old. Interestingly enough, just before Steve Bannon was discovering this world, a very similar thing was happening to me. Because as a teenager between the years of 2004 and 2007, I played World of Warcraft a lot. Like, I would get home at 4 in the afternoon and play until 4 in the morning. Oh yes, would you believe that your beloved narrator was once, in fact, a beta male? And it was in this carnival of insomniacs, Powerade, and internet girlfriends where I was first introduced to internet culture. Now, the pipeline back then was really quite simple. The in-game chat would lead you on to TeamSpeak and Ventrilo servers, then Realm forums and IRC rooms, where people would regularly share links to 4chan. And my first impression of 4chan was fairly positive. I got to see the origins of Lolcat and Chuck Norris memes, which admittedly aged like milk in the desert, but then I also got to see the birth of Rickrolling, where you send someone a disguised hyperlink leading to a music video of Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up, a practice which still remains a staple of our culture today. And then I was introduced to lots and lots of racist jokes. At 14, 15 years old in a 40-man raid with mostly older guys, initiating me into the world of controversial humor. And I didn't think all that much of it. They were just jokes. And if you'd asked me at the time, I probably would have said something like, well, we all know racism is stupid, right? That's why it's funny, because it reduces racism to exactly what it is. A joke. How naive I was. Because after the raids ended and there were only a few people left online, I started to notice that quite a few of those people were not joking. And the ones who were telling racist jokes by day were now going into more serious topics at night. They started talking about black crime rates, about the barbaric nature of Islam, about how the Jews have too much power. Did you know that sub-Saharan Africans still haven't invented the wheel? One of them even told me about a controversial study which showed that black people were of a lower stage of evolution than white people. Over on 4chan, people were making very similar claims. And these were studies by professors and shit. I didn't know how to handle this as a teenager. Now, honestly, I don't remember feeling any animosity or derision towards black people or Muslims or Jews. But for a short time, and I think this is the case with quite a few people, I was kind of into this stuff. And not just because it was controversial, but because as an underachieving 14-year-old with really nothing else going for them, this was the first time when I felt like I knew something that other people didn't. Like I was suddenly aware of some inconvenient truth that other people couldn't face up to. I was so confident with what I'd learned that I even took it to my biology teacher. I was like, hey, you claim to be a biology teacher, yet you haven't told us about this controversial study that shows why black people are genetically inferior. Like, I didn't say it in that way, but that was the idea. And I was sure to remind him that there were professors saying this stuff. And my teacher, who was a brilliant guy really, sat me down and said, all right, LonerBox, listen the f*** up, you little manlet. When a professor has an idea that they want to share, they can do it in two ways. The first is the way that they're typically trained to do it. This could mean publishing their research in a peer-reviewed journal, or presenting their work at a conference where their colleagues have a chance to ask questions and make criticisms. Or, if they're feeling a bit more shy, there are plenty of ways they can bypass this process. They can self-publish, they can publish their work through a think tank, or in the press. And if they're especially lazy, they can just put it up on some weird website that hasn't been updated since 1994. The former method is for people willing to have their work scrutinized by other professionals, to risk ridicule and humiliation at the hands of their colleagues. And the latter method is for people who want their work to live in an echo chamber, in a safe space for fannies. The credentials of the person making a claim isn't really what matters. What matters is how they choose to make that claim. And the world has no shortage of sensitive academics ignoring what they were trained to do and cynically using their credentials to spout whatever bullshit they like. This was probably one of the most valuable things I ever learned from school. And I know what some of you are thinking. Of course they're not publishing studies on racial differences in peer-reviewed journals. Those kinds of controversial topics will get you censored or fired. Just like in 1984, that book about a guy who gets tortured and brainwashed by the state just for being a conservative. But that is just not true. Topics like racial differences, for example, are studied in academia all the time. It's just that their findings are a little inconvenient for some people. For example, they might find that there are more genetic differences within Africans than there are between Africans and Eurasians. When it comes to IQ, they can show that the most consistent measure for differences between groups is education, not race. Or research from 1950s South Africa found a 15-point IQ difference between the privileged white urban population and the rural population of Afrikaners, who were also white. But as for my own journey, I guess I just started becoming a lot more doubtful of the talking points I was hearing. After seeing the rampant dehumanization and hatred that went with it, the whole inconvenient truth thing started to lose its charm. And for a community so obsessed with IQ, These were very confused and irrational people. There was a really obvious contradiction where these people would rail against academia for being liberal and Marxist and gay, but then they would desperately use whatever veneer of academia they could to back up their own claims. Take this meme, for example. Now, I have no idea what this means. The person who posted this image doesn't know what it means, and the person who made it probably had no intention of sharing it with people who know what it means. But if you're someone who really wants to believe that black and white people are essentially a different species, this is a good meme. And if you're lucky, you could even use it to get someone who disagrees with you to start second-guessing themselves. The problem with arguments like this is that so much of our DNA is essentially just junk that we pass on, but doesn't actually change anything about us. It's a bit of a myth that we share 50% of our DNA with bananas. The real number is closer to 20%, but that still doesn't mean we're 1/5 the same as bananas. From the biologists I've asked about this, the fixation index is something that's used to measure levels of breeding between populations, not the overall difference between them. But I am not a biologist, and I would simply ask you to look at the carefully chosen photo of this majestic American wolf contrasted with a shit-faced coyote that looks like it spent the last 2 weeks in a K-hole, and ask yourself, what could the person who made this possibly be trying to say? Other than to share their passion for very complex PhD level science, of course. Personally, I decided that this whole thing really wasn't for me. As for World of Warcraft, the new expansions like Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King started to make the game a lot less time-consuming, and as a consequence, much more amicable to normies. Around the same time, a young Elliot Rodger complained that newer players would brag about their sexual experiences in-game, and it suddenly became a trend to use the word virgin as a pejorative against the more immersed players. Because Warcraft is essentially a social game, I also noticed that the more well-adjusted players who were easier to get along with started replacing the more unpleasant addicts in guilds. You could say it was a kind of great replacement. But for me, as an autistic teenager, it was kind of refreshing. When I heard other players talking about their lives outside of WoW, the whole concept of socializing suddenly became a lot less intimidating to me. I started playing less, made some friends, kissed some femoids, learned a bunch of musical instruments, and eventually my strange adolescence of 40-man raids, intense PvP, and casual bigotry started to fade away. When it came to 4chan, I've always noticed that their users, especially the more political ones, seem to be really adept at doing their own negative PR. I go on there from time to time, and it looks like their talent for self-owning is still as strong as ever. Like, there was this meme which I think is trying to say that fascism is cool and Judaism isn't, even though the fascist kid looks completely miserable, like he's doomed to a life of chronic back pain, whilst the Judaism kid has this impeccable posture and kind of looks like they're squaring up to a mob of seething reactionaries, standing tall like a total champion. And then there are things like this screed about how there's going to be a second civil war in America, and they've even put some YouTube links about how to prepare for it. Because there have always been two kinds of users on 4chan. There are the trolls who, at the very least, have no issue when it comes to self-awareness, and then there are these people. The kind of LARPer who fancies himself as a deadly yet honourable soldier with a trad wife, a baby, and a polyamorous backpacking mistress, apparently? I don't even know. And I think this was the thing that really put me off. The fact that these people are just the absolute worst representations of the things they claim to be fighting for. Everyone knows that this post was not written by a jacked soldier who's up to his knees in blonde pussy. It was written by a terrified sad boy who thinks the real root of his unhappiness is the idea of DC and Puerto Rico getting statehood. And if there's one thing I learned from being a regular on this site, it was, don't be like these people.